The Taliban's return to power in Afghanistan in 2021 marked a significant shift in the country's political and social landscape. The group, known for its strict interpretation of Islamic law, quickly moved to impose its ideology on Afghan society. A pivotal moment arrived in July 2023 with the ratification of the new Vice and Virtue Law. This law, comprising 35 new statutes, codified the Taliban's vision of Sharia. It mandated stringent dress codes for women, banned musical instruments, and prohibited women from performing in public. The new laws were met with widespread fear and uncertainty among the Afghan people, particularly women who had experienced relative freedom during the previous 2 decades. The international community also expressed concern, viewing these measures as a regression of human rights and a violation of international norms. The Taliban, however, remained steadfast in its conviction, arguing that these laws were essential for creating a morally upright society in accordance with their interpretation of Islamic principles. The implementation of these laws has had a profound impact on Afghan society, particularly for women and girls. Access to education and employment opportunities has been severely restricted. The vibrant cultural life of Afghanistan has been stifled. The Taliban's actions have drawn condemnation from human rights organizations and raised questions about the group's commitment to inclusivity and respect for fundamental freedoms. Despite facing international pressure and internal dissent, the Taliban leadership remains committed to its ideological vision. They see the new laws as a cornerstone of their rule, essential for achieving their goal of establishing an Islamic emirate in Afghanistan. The impact of these laws continues to be felt deeply across Afghan society, shaping the daily lives of its citizens and raising concerns about the future of human rights in the country. While the Taliban presents a united front to the world, cracks are appearing within the movement over the interpretation and enforcement of Sharia law. The new Vice and Virtue Law in particular has exposed divisions within the Taliban ranks. Some governors have openly resisted implementing the stricter regulations, arguing they are impractical and alienate the population. This internal dissent is significant, highlighting the complexities within the Taliban and the challenges of governing a diverse country with varying interpretations of Islam. A key figure in this internal resistance is Deputy Foreign Minister Abbas Staniksai, who has publicly opposed restrictions on women, particularly in education and employment. His stance reflects a more moderate faction within the Taliban, advocating for a more pragmatic approach to governance and engagement with the international community. This internal debate over the role of women in society and the interpretation of Islamic law underscores the evolving nature of the Taliban and the challenges it faces in consolidating its authority. Adding to the internal pressure, tribal leaders, often wielding significant influence within their communities, have also expressed reservations about the stringent social restrictions. Their opposition, often rooted in a more localized understanding of Pashtunwali, the customary code of conduct predating the Taliban's rise, further complicates the group's efforts to impose a uniform interpretation of Islamic law across Afghanistan. These internal divisions highlight the difficulties the Taliban face in balancing its ideological aspirations with the practicalities of governance. The presence of dissenting voices within the movement, particularly from prominent figures like Staniksai, suggests that the Taliban is not monolithic in its views. This internal debate could potentially create space for more moderate voices to influence the group's policies and engage in dialogue with the international community. The Taliban's strict interpretation of Islamic law has not gone unchallenged internationally. Muslim-majority countries and organizations, including those previously sympathetic to the Taliban, have voiced strong opposition to the group's policies, particularly regarding women's rights. The Organization of Islamic Cooperation, a body representing 57 Muslim-majority nations, has been particularly vocal in its criticism, condemning the Taliban's actions as a distortion of Islamic teachings. This widespread condemnation from within the Muslim world undermines the Taliban's claim to represent a unified Islamic front and exposes the group's ideological isolation. Adding weight to this international denunciation, prominent Afghan religious scholars have joined the chorus of disapproval. These scholars, many of whom have studied Islam in renowned institutions across the Muslim world, argue that the Taliban's harsh restrictions, particularly those targeting women's education and public presence, are not rooted in genuine Islamic principles but rather reflect a misogynistic and culturally specific perspective. Their critiques carry significant weight within Afghan society, where religious scholars hold a position of moral authority. Further intensifying the pressure, Afghan women's rights activists have taken their plea to the international stage, urging the OIC's Fiqh Academy, a prestigious body of Islamic jurisprudence, to issue a fatwa against the Taliban's misuse of Islamic sources. This bold move seeks to leverage the moral authority of Islamic scholarship to challenge the Taliban's legitimacy and expose the hypocrisy of their claims. This unified front of opposition from within the Muslim world poses a significant challenge to the Taliban. It undercuts the group's attempts to gain international legitimacy and highlights the divergence of their ideology from mainstream Islamic thought. The international community should capitalize on this momentum, amplifying the voices of moderate Muslims and Afghan scholars to counter the Taliban's narrative and promote a more inclusive vision of Islam. The international community faces a delicate balancing act in its response to the Taliban's rule in Afghanistan. While condemning the human rights violations and the restrictive social policies, there is a recognition of the need to engage with the Taliban to avert a humanitarian catastrophe and prevent Afghanistan from becoming a haven for terrorism. This pragmatic approach, however, is fraught with challenges, as it risks legitimizing the Taliban's rule without securing tangible progress on human rights and good governance. Despite the reservations, channels of communication remain open. A UN-led meeting in Qatar in July 2024 saw representatives from various countries engaging with the Taliban, albeit without formal recognition of the regime. This cautious engagement reflects the international community's recognition of the Taliban as a reality in Afghanistan, while attempting to use dialogue and diplomacy to influence their behavior. The deportation of Afghan asylum seekers by some European countries, however, presents a contradictory picture, raising concerns about the sincerity of the international community's commitment to protecting those fleeing Taliban rule. While the West grapples with its strategy, regional actors like Uzbekistan and the UAE have taken a more pragmatic approach, prioritizing economic and security interests. Uzbekistan signed trade agreements with the Taliban, seeking to secure access to Afghan markets and ensure stability along its border. The UAE, meanwhile, recognized a Taliban ambassador, a move that drew criticism from the West but highlighted the divergent approaches to engaging with the new Afghan government. The international community's response remains fragmented, torn between condemnation and engagement. This lack of a cohesive strategy risks emboldening the Taliban, while doing little to alleviate the suffering of the Afghan people. A more robust and principled approach is needed, one that prioritizes human rights and links any form of engagement or assistance to tangible progress on issues like women's rights, freedom of speech, and inclusive governance.